In this instructional video, students will compare decimals that are both in the tenths and the hundredths place by using the comparison signs of greater than, less than, and equal to. Let's go back to our place value chart. If we are comparing decimals, we need to be able to recognize the decimal place value. Since decimals are part of a whole, their place value is to the right of the whole number. Tenths are larger than hundredths, and since you need less tenths to equal a whole, remember that 10 tenths equals 1 whole, and 100 hundredths equals 1 whole. The more pieces you need, the smaller the piece. If we are looking to compare two decimals, our first strategy would be to find where the decimal falls on the number line. If I am looking at these two decimals, in order to compare them, I can figure out where they go on a number line. Both of these decimals are less than 1, so my number line would be between 0 and 1. 5 tenths would be my benchmark number because I know where 5 tenths falls on a number line between 0 and 1 because 5 tenths is equivalent to 1/2. If I am counting by tenths, I know that 6 tenths would come right after 5 tenths. I also know that 2 tenths is less than 5 tenths, so it would fall before the halfway point, about right there. By looking at my number line, I can see that 6 tenths is closer to 1 whole, so 6 tenths is greater than 2 tenths. Let's look at how to compare numbers using both hundredths. First, we have 37 hundredths and we have 2 hundredths. Both of these numbers are less than 1 whole, so our number line would also fall between 0 and 1. If we are comparing hundredths, halfway to 100 would be 50 hundredths, and it would go right in the middle. 37 hundredths is less than 50 hundredths, so it would go about right here on the number line. And 2 hundredths is really close to 0. Imagine if there are 100 pieces of a puzzle, but you only have 2 of them, you are 98 pieces away from the whole. So it would go about right there on the number line. And looking at my number line, I can see that 37 hundredths is greater than 2 hundredths. What if we are given two decimals, but one is in tenths and one is in hundredths? The pieces we are comparing have to be the same size. So go back to your knowledge of making equivalent fractions and rewrite 7 tenths into hundredths. 7 tenths is equal to 70 hundredths, and we can write them in decimal form like this. So our equivalent decimal to 7 tenths is 70 hundredths. And if we're using a number line, it would be between 0 and 1 because both of these numbers are less than 1 whole. 50 hundredths would be halfway. 38 hundredths would go before 50 hundredths, and 70 hundredths would go after 50 hundredths. So 70 hundredths is greater than 38 hundredths. You could be given two numbers to compare, and one is in fraction form and one is a decimal. If that's the case, you would want to put both numbers into the same form. Either put the decimals into fraction form or the fractions into decimal form. 13 hundredths is in decimal form, so I'm going to make 23 hundredths into decimal form as well. 23 hundredths in decimal form looks like this. Using our number line, we know both of these numbers are less than a whole, so our number line would go from 0 to 1, and halfway would be 50 hundredths. 23 hundredths is a little bit greater than 13 hundredths, so it would fall there on the number line, and we can see that 23 hundredths is greater than 13 hundredths.